Havana, Cuba, December 1946. The air inside the Hotel Nacional conference room was thick with cigar smoke and tension so dense you could taste it on your tongue. 23 of the most powerful crime bosses in America sat around a massive mahogany table, their faces carved from stone, their eyes cold as winter steel. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a trial. And Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, though not present in the room, was already convicted in the minds of most men sitting at that table. Meyer Lansky stood outside the conference room door, his hand gripping a leather briefcase so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Inside that briefcase was $100,000 in cash, clean bills, unmarked, the kind of money that could buy silence, loyalty, or in this case, time. He was 44 years old, 5 foot 4 inches tall, a man who newspapers would later call the mob's accountant, the financial genius of organized crime, the little man who loomed larger than giants. But in this moment, standing outside that door, Meyer Lansky was just a man about to walk into a room where his best friend's life hung by a thread. Through the thick wooden door, he could hear voices rising, anger, frustration, the kind of rage that preceded bloodshed. Lucky Luciano's voice cut through the noise, sharp, authoritative. The voice of a man who had reorganized the American Mafia, who had turned chaotic street gangs into a national crime syndicate. $6 million, Luciano said, and even through the door, Lansky could hear the fury in those 3 words. We gave him $1.5 million. He promised us the Flamingo would be ready in 6 months. It's been over a year. Where did the money go? Someone else spoke. Lansky recognized the Brooklyn accent of Albert Anastasia, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him into every room he entered. He's stealing from us, Charlie. Him and that dame, Virginia Hill. She's been making trips to Switzerland. They're skimming. They think we're stupid. Lansky closed his eyes. He'd known this day was coming. He'd seen the construction costs spiraling out of control. He'd watched Bugsy become obsessed with the Flamingo, pouring money into marble floors and crystal chandeliers, building not just a casino, but a temple to his own vision of Las Vegas. Contractors were robbing him blind, buying materials, stealing them at night, then selling them back to Bugsy the next morning. Post-war construction costs had exploded. Skilled labor was scarce. Materials were expensive. But try explaining economics to men who dealt in blood and bullets. I say we end this tonight, came another voice. Frank Costello, measured, calm, which made it all the more dangerous. Make the decision. Send word. By Christmas, the Flamingo problem is solved. Lansky heard chairs scraping against the floor, men murmuring agreement. The vote was coming, and once these men voted for death, death was inevitable. He thought about Bugsy, Benjamin Siegelbaum, the wild kid from Brooklyn who'd become his partner, his friend, his brother in everything but blood. They'd met when they were teenagers, 2 Jewish kids in the Lower East Side, learning to survive in a world that didn't care if they lived or died. They'd built the Bugs and Meyer mob together. They'd worked alongside Lucky Luciano to create the National Crime Syndicate. They'd survived prohibition, gang wars, federal investigations. Bugsy had saved Meyer's life more than once, a fact Meyer Lansky never forgot. In their world, loyalty wasn't just a word. It was currency. It was law. Meyer Lansky opened the conference room door and walked inside. If stories like these make you see Meyer Lansky in a different light, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe now, because there's still so much of this story that few people know. The conversation stopped the moment Meyer Lansky entered the room. 23 pairs of eyes turned to look at him, some curious, some annoyed, some calculating, already wondering what angle he was working. Lansky closed the door behind him and walked to the head of the table where Lucky Luciano sat. He didn't ask permission. He simply placed the leather briefcase on the table in front of Luciano and stepped back. The room was silent. Luciano looked at the briefcase, then at Lansky. They'd known each other since they were teenagers. The story went that they'd met when Luciano tried to shake down young Meyer for protection money on his walk home from school. Instead of paying, Meyer had stood his ground, faced down Luciano and his crew. Luciano, impressed by the kid's nerve, became his friend instead of his tormentor. That friendship had lasted 3 decades, but friendship only went so far in this world. "Meyer," Luciano said, his voice neutral, "we're in the middle of something." "I know what you're in the middle of," Lansky said quietly. His voice was soft, almost gentle. It was one of his greatest weapons. Men expected gangsters to yell, to threaten, to pound tables. Meyer Lansky never raised his voice. He never had to. "You're about to make a decision about Ben Siegel. Ben has cost this organization $6 million. Vito Genovese said from across the table. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "He's made us look like fools." Lansky didn't look at Genovese. He kept his eyes on Luciano. "Open the briefcase, Charlie," he said. Luciano studied Lansky for a long moment, then reached out and flipped open the brass latches. The briefcase lid lifted. Inside, stacked in neat bundles, were rows of $100 bills. The overhead light caught the bills, made them almost glow. $100,000. Men around the table leaned forward to look. Some remained seated, but their eyes were fixed on the money. In 1946, $100,000 wasn't just money. It was power. It was possibility. It was the kind of sum that could change empires. "That's my money," Lansky said. His voice remained calm, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "My personal funds, not syndicate money. Mine. I'm putting it into the Flamingo. Right now. Tonight." Santo Traficante spoke from the other side of the table. "Why would you do that, Meyer? Everyone knows the Flamingo is bleeding money." "Because I believe in it," Lansky said simply. "And I believe in Ben." Joe Adonis laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You believe in a man who's stealing from us?" "He's not stealing," Lansky said, and for the first time there was steel beneath the softness of his voice. "He's building. There's a difference. The contractors are robbing him. The war made construction expensive. These are facts. You want someone to blame? Blame the economy. Blame the war. But don't blame Ben for trying to build something that will make all of us richer than we've ever been." "Pretty speech," Anastasia said, "but words don't pay back $6 million. Lansky turned to face him directly. "You're right. Words don't. But this will." He gestured to the briefcase. "And when the Flamingo opens on December 26th, 10 days from now, it will prove that Ben can deliver. Give him one more chance. Let the opening night speak for itself. If it fails, then you can make your decision. And if we give him this chance," Frank Costello said slowly, "and he fails anyway," Lansky met his eyes, "then I'll vote with you." The room went silent again. Men exchanged glances. What Meyer Lansky had just offered wasn't just money. It was something far more valuable. He was putting his own reputation, his own standing in the organization, on the line for Bugsy Siegel. In their world, that meant everything. You're watching one man gamble his entire future on loyalty. Have you ever been asked to make a sacrifice like that? Lucky Luciano leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face. He'd been deported from the United States earlier that year, sent back to Italy after serving time in prison. He'd obtained false documents to travel to Cuba, determined to maintain his control over the American mob from just 90 miles offshore. This conference was supposed to re-establish his authority, prove he was still the boss of bosses. But Meyer Lansky had just changed the game. 100,000, Luciano said quietly. "That's a lot of money to bet on friendship, Meyer." "It's not about friendship," Lansky replied. "It's about business. Ben has vision. He sees what Las Vegas can become. Right now, it's just a dusty desert town. In 10 years, it'll be bigger than Havana, bigger than Cuba. Legal gambling, open casinos, no hiding, no payoffs to local cops. Just pure, legitimate business where we control everything." "You sound like Ben," Genovese said with a sneer. "All dreams, no results." Lansky finally turned to face Genovese directly. The two men had history. Complicated history. Genovese had ambitions. He wanted power. He wanted to be what Luciano was. And men with ambition were dangerous. "I deal in numbers, Vito," Lansky said. "Not dreams." I know what every casino in Havana makes. I know what the casinos in Hot Springs make, in New Orleans, in Miami. I can tell you, down to the dollar, how much money flows through our gambling operations every month. That's not dreaming. That's mathematics. And the mathematics say that Las Vegas, done right, will be worth 50 Havanas. Big words, Genovese said. Backed by big money, Lansky countered, nodding toward the briefcase. I'm not asking you to believe in dreams. I'm asking you to believe in profit, in return on investment, in giving an asset one more chance to perform before you liquidate it. The business language wasn't accidental. These men understood violence, but they also understood money. And Meyer Lansky spoke the language of money better than anyone in that room. Doc Stacher, who'd been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, finally spoke. He was one of Lansky's closest associates, a man who'd been with Meyer since the early days. I was in Las Vegas last month, he said. I saw the Flamingo. It's not finished, but what's there is beautiful, spectacular. Nothing like it exists anywhere. Not in Miami, not in Cuba, not anywhere. If Ben can pull this off— If, Costello interrupted. That's a big if. It is, Lansky agreed, which is why I'm betting my own money. Not asking you to bet yours. I'm asking for time. 10 days. Let him open the hotel. Let's see what happens. If it fails, I'll eat the loss. And you can do whatever you decide to do about Ben. Charlie Fischetti leaned forward. He'd come from Chicago with his brother Rocco, representing the Chicago outfit. What if he runs? What if he takes your 100 grand and Virginia Hill and disappears to South America? He won't, Lansky said with absolute certainty. Ben's not a coward. He's a lot of things, but he's not that. He'll open the Flamingo. He'll try to make it work, and we'll know one way or another in 10 days. Luciano looked around the table, reading faces, gauging reactions. He'd built this organization on consensus, on making the bosses feel like they had a voice. But he also knew that Meyer Lansky didn't make emotional decisions. If Meyer was willing to risk $100,000 of his own money, there was calculation behind it. You really believe in Las Vegas? Luciano said. It wasn't a question. I believe in legal gambling, Lansky said. I believe in open cities where we don't have to hide, where senators and judges and businessmen can walk into our casinos without fear, where we're not criminals, we're entrepreneurs. That's what Las Vegas can be. That's what Ben is trying to build. And yes, Charlie, I believe in it enough to risk my own money. Anastasia shook his head. You're soft on him, Meyer. He's your friend, so you can't see clearly. Maybe, Lansky admitted. Or maybe you're so focused on the money he's lost that you can't see the money he's about to make. Either way, I'm asking for 10 days. After the opening, if I'm wrong, I'll stand with whatever decision this table makes. That was the moment, the offering. Meyer Lansky, one of the most powerful men in organized crime, publicly promising to accept the table's judgment. In doing so, he was binding himself to their collective will. It was a gesture of respect, of submission to the group's authority. But it was also a masterstroke of strategy, because by volunteering to abide by their decision, he was making it harder for them to decide against him now. The discussion continued for another hour. Men argued. Voices rose and fell. Some wanted to vote immediately to kill Siegel. Others were swayed by Lansky's argument, by the money on the table, by the promise of what Las Vegas could become. Santo Traficante asked about operations in Cuba. The conversation shifted. They discussed casino licenses, government payoffs to President Batista, narcotics routes from Mexico and South America. The Siegel situation was tabled, not decided, simply left hanging while other business was conducted. This was how these meetings worked. Nothing was ever simple. Everything was negotiation, compromise, trading favors and grudges across the table like poker chips. But eventually, they returned to the Flamingo, to Bugsy Siegel, to the question that had brought them to this room in the first place. Lucky Luciano spoke. Everyone who wants to give Ben Siegel until after the opening to prove himself, raise your hand. Lansky raised his hand immediately. So did Doc Stacher. Frank Costello hesitated, then raised his. Joe Adonis followed. One by one, hands went up around the table. Not all of them. Genovese kept his hands folded. So did a few others. But the majority voted to wait. Luciano nodded. Then it's decided. Ben gets until after the opening. Meyer, your 100,000 stays in play. You're personally invested now. If the Flamingo fails, we revisit this conversation, and next time friendship won't be enough to save him. Lansky nodded. Understood. Meeting's over, Luciano said. We break for Christmas. Everyone back here day after tomorrow. We've got other business to discuss. The men began to stand, gathering coats, shaking hands, forming small groups for private conversations. Some left immediately. Others lingered. Vito Genovese approached Lansky as he closed the briefcase, now empty. The money had been claimed, divided among the investors to immediately reduce the Flamingo's debt. Symbolic more than practical, but symbols mattered. You made a mistake tonight, Genovese said quietly. His voice was for Lansky alone. You put yourself between this organization and its money. That's dangerous. Lansky looked up at him. Even standing, he was shorter than Genovese. But his eyes were level, unafraid. I put myself behind a sound investment, Vito. There's a difference. We'll see, Genovese said. We'll see if your investment pays off, or if you just bought yourself a seat next to Bugsy when his time comes. He walked away before Lansky could respond. Doc Stacher came over, waited until Genovese was out of earshot. You made an enemy tonight, he said. I've had enemies before, Lansky replied. He closed the briefcase with a soft click. Vito's not the first, won't be the last. This is different. You publicly backed Ben over the organization's judgment. If the Flamingo fails, then I'll deal with the consequences, Lansky said. He looked at his friend. But Doc, it won't fail. I've seen the plans. I know the numbers. Yes, Ben's spending too much. Yes, the costs are out of control, but the concept is sound. And once it's open, once people see what he's built, they'll come. They'll come in droves. Because there's nothing else like it in the world. I hope you're right, Stacker said. So do I, Lansky admitted. For the first time that night, his voice carried a hint of doubt. Just a hint. Just enough to show he was human. Because if I'm wrong, I just bet everything on a losing hand. Outside, Havana was alive with music and laughter. Christmas was coming. The Hotel Nacional's casino was packed with tourists and locals, all of them unaware that upstairs, in a conference room thick with cigar smoke, the fate of Las Vegas had just been decided. Meyer Lansky walked through the casino floor, anonymous in his simple suit, just another gambler in a city of gamblers. No one looked twice at him. That's how he liked it. Power didn't need to announce itself with gold chains and flashy suits. Real power moved quiet, invisible, lethal. He thought about Bugsy, out in Los Angeles, probably pacing, worried, knowing this meeting was happening, knowing his life hung in the balance. Meyer would call him tomorrow, tell him he'd bought some time, tell him the opening had to be perfect, had to prove every doubter wrong. But tonight, Meyer Lansky just walked, thinking, calculating, already planning his next move, because in his world, you were always 3 moves ahead, or you were dead. Was this power, or was it something deeper than power? The Flamingo opened on December 26, 1946. It was, by most accounts, a disaster. The hotel wasn't finished. Only the casino, restaurant, and a few rooms were operational. A rainstorm hit Los Angeles, grounding planes and keeping Hollywood stars away. The guests who did show up gambled, won big, and the house lost money. Within 2 weeks, the Flamingo closed for renovations. The mob bosses were furious. Meyer Lansky's gamble looked like it had failed, but Meyer kept arguing, kept defending, kept pushing. He convinced them to give it another few months. Let Bugsy finish the hotel properly. Let him open again when everything was ready. They agreed. Barely. The Flamingo reopened in March 1947. This time it was complete. This time celebrities came. This time the casino made money. Not a lot, but enough to show promise. Enough to prove the concept could work. But by then, it was too late for Bugsy Siegel. The investors had lost patience. The suspicions about Virginia Hill and Switzerland had grown. The feeling that Bugsy was skimming money had hardened into certainty. Fair or not, true or not, The decision had been made. On June 20th, 1947, Bugsy Siegel sat in Virginia Hill's Beverly Hills mansion reading the Los Angeles Times. A gunman with a military carbine rose from the bushes outside and fired 4 shots through the window. 2 bullets hit Bugsy in the head, 2 in the torso. He died instantly. 20 minutes later, Meyer Lansky's associates walked into the Flamingo and took control. The casino became wildly profitable. Within a few years, it was generating millions. Other casinos opened on the Las Vegas Strip. The desert town became the gambling capital of the world. Everything Meyer Lansky had predicted came true, but Bugsy Siegel never saw it, never got to enjoy what he'd built, never got to prove he wasn't skimming, never got to show his vision was right. Meyer Lansky lived another 36 years after Bugsy died. He became one of the wealthiest, most powerful mobsters in American history. He expanded operations to Cuba, to the Bahamas, to offshore banks and legitimate businesses. He was investigated by the FBI repeatedly, but never convicted of any major crime. He lived comfortably in Miami, played with his grandchildren, and died in his bed at age 81. In interviews later in life, reporters would ask Meyer about Bugsy, about Las Vegas, about the Flamingo, about whether he'd approved the hit on his best friend. Meyer Lansky always gave the same answer. "If it had been up to me," he would say quietly, "Ben Siegel would be alive today." Whether that was true, no one knows. Meyer Lansky took his secrets to the grave. But people who knew him, who worked with him, who studied him, all agree on one thing. The night he walked into that Havana conference room with $100,000 in cash wasn't about money. It was about loyalty, about trying to save a friend's life with the only weapons he had. Intelligence, strategy, the ability to speak the language these men understood. He'd bought Bugsy time, 6 months. Half a year that Bugsy wouldn't have had otherwise. And in those 6 months, Bugsy got to see the Flamingo reopen successfully. Got to prove, even briefly, that his vision was real. Was it enough? Was 6 months of life worth the price Meyer paid? The enmity with Genovese, the risk to his own reputation, the $100,000, the weight of knowing he couldn't save his friend in the end. Only Meyer Lansky could answer that, and Meyer Lansky never did. What we know is this. In December 1946, in a hotel room in Havana, Cuba, a small man with a briefcase full of cash walked into a room of killers and bought his friend the only thing he could buy: time. Not salvation, not safety, just time. And sometimes, in the world Meyer Lansky inhabited, time was the most valuable currency of all. The Flamingo still stands in Las Vegas today, a monument to Bugsy Siegel's vision and Meyer Lansky's strategy. Millions of people visit it every year, gamble in its casino, sleep in its rooms, never knowing the story of how it almost never existed, how it was saved by loyalty, strategy, and $100,000 in a leather briefcase. Meyer Lansky understood something most people never learn. Power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's not about violence or intimidation. Real power is about understanding what people want, what they fear, what they value, and using that understanding to reshape reality itself. That night in Havana, the mob wanted money. They wanted certainty. They wanted to feel like they were in control. Meyer Lansky gave them all three. He gave them cash to reduce their immediate loss. He gave them a timeline and a structure for decision-making. He gave them the illusion that they were choosing when really he was guiding. That's genius. Not the kind they teach in schools. The kind you learn surviving on the streets of the Lower East Side. The kind you develop through decades of navigating violence, betrayal, and the razor's edge between success and death. Meyer Lansky lived his entire life on that edge. And when history looks back, we see him not as the accountant, not as the little man, but as one of the great strategic minds of the 20th century. A man who understood that intelligence without courage is worthless, that loyalty without strategy is suicide, that real power moves quiet, thinks ahead, and never, ever stops calculating. The Havana Conference ended 79 years ago. The men who attended it are all dead now. Their empires crumbled, Their power faded. Their names live on only in history books and true crime documentaries. But the lessons they taught us, the lessons men like Meyer Lansky embodied, those remain. Because human nature doesn't change. The desire for power, for loyalty, for respect. The willingness to risk everything for a friend. The ability to stay calm when everyone around you is panicking. These things are timeless. Meyer Lansky knew that. He lived it. And on one December night in 1946, he proved it in the most tangible way possible. With $100,000 in cash and the kind of quiet courage that doesn't need a gun to command a room. That's the story people don't tell about Meyer Lansky. The story behind the story. The moment when everything hung in the balance, and one man's strategic brilliance bought 6 more months of life for his best friend. It wasn't enough to save him in the end, but it was something. And in Meyer Lansky's world, something was infinitely better than nothing. Because when you're measuring a man's life in months, in weeks, in days, every moment becomes precious. Every conversation carries weight. Every sunset is a gift. Bugsy Siegel got 6 more months because Meyer Lansky walked into a room of killers and refused to let his friend die without a fight. That's loyalty. That's power. That's Meyer Lansky.